there's stories every day. I had a friend visiting a couple of months ago. He was here. And this was before they started the MPP program, the Remain in Mexico program. We had a young man come in, he was 19 years old. He had a baby that was no more than a week old. This was a newborn baby. So my friend didn't speak Spanish, but he had his phone and he had Google Translate. And he just got into a conversation with the man. And he asked him, you know, where's the baby's mother? Where's your wife? So the man was 19 years old, his wife was 16 years old. They didn't have paperwork to prove that they were married. So at the border, they separated them. They took the 16-year-old woman because she was, according to them, she was an unaccompanied minor because she couldn't prove that they were married. So they took her away and they put her in a child detention center. And they released this 19-year-old with a week-old baby. So the mother was breastfeeding, and they take the mother away from the child. Like, this is a 19-year-old, this is a kid. He doesn't know the first thing about taking care of a baby. I looked over, I saw them talking, and I saw my friend Ed, who's, you know, Ed is he's a very sensitive man, but he's not somebody that cries very frequently.
Individuals arriving in or entering the United States from Mexico illegally or without proper documentation may be returned to Mexico for the duration of their immigration proceedings. If they are granted asylum by a U.S. judge, they will be welcomed into America. If they are not, they will be removed to their home countries.
The Border Patrol, our function is apprehend, process, and turn over. The reason we've been so overwhelmed is because all those other agencies have not had the resources to accommodate the large flow of family units and unaccompanied children that have been making their way into the United States. So like, this flow is not new. What's new is that it's family units and it's unaccompanied children. Back then, we were dealing with single adults. Criminal organizations got involved because they saw a potential for business. If you ask some of these folks, they're paying anywhere between $5,000 to $15,000 to come here. Está muy peligroso ahí, está muy peligroso ahí. Está muy peligroso ahí. Ahí está muy peligroso. See, they're trying to avoid them. But this is really, I'm telling them it's very bad right here. ¿Todos son menores de edad?
Todos menores de edad.
¿Y qué edad tienes tú?
Nací en el 2003, 16 años voy a cumplir.
¿Y tú, mijo?
2005, 13 años.
¿Y tú?
2004.
¿Y tú?
2002.
¿Qué edad tienes tú?
16.
¿Tú?
2002. 17.
17. ¿Y todos son de Guatemala?
No, de Honduras.
De Honduras. Siéntense aquí, ahí viene el oficial a ayudarles. ¿Y no son primos, ni hermanos, ni nada? No. Nomás se conocen. They're actually minors. They're all under 17. They're from Honduras. And they're going to be transported to our facility where we hold unaccompanied children. They made their trek on their own. They've arrived without any adult supervision. It's tough. These kids, they didn't know how to get here. They're from Honduras. You and I go to Honduras, we don't know where to go. We have to ask someone. So the criminal organizations, they'll hold them. They'll, what we call the stash house, right? Where they hold them and they'll send them depending on what they need. And you saw the authorities on the Mexican side were coming, And I told them it wasn't safe to cross there, but they saw the authorities and they decided to risk the cross.
John the Baptist went throughout the whole region of Judea, proclaiming a baptism of repentance.
Is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want.
You prepare the way of the Lord.
Here in Kansas, we don't see a lot of the immigration issues. We see some. We're very interested and want people to be educated about what's happening because the news outlets that they get here, the newspapers in this particular area don't really cover the information. We are attempting to help them see that the immigrants aren't coming because they're looking for a new country to live in. They are really looking for safety and security, and that their lives in their home countries are truly not healthy and not good and not safe. But we don't know that here.
That's a significant way to learn about what's happening and how other people can teach you what's happening by being involved with them. And that's what was the stimulus for me to go. Because I hear so many stories about what's happening down there and so many different perspectives. I believe as an American, as a person, a human person, that what we do to one person, we do to everyone. I don't see any other way, really, that's better to learn, to grow as a person, and to have an opportunity to experience a little bit of what they're experiencing there at this time, in sharing with them, just by being one with them as best I can, in whatever way I'm invited to or able.
There's not a whole lot one person can do or 3 or 4 people can do as far as changing the current situation with the influx of immigrants and the situation from the home countries. But what we can do and what I can do is just be there and be present with them and to show some solidarity. I've been to El Paso 5 or 6 times on this same kind of border experience, and every time that I go, I come back with a different understanding of really what's going on at the border, and also a different understanding of the immigrants and why they're here. You know, on this trip, I guess I bring a lot of compassion and I bring a lot of understanding in the situations that some families have been separated and children have not been with their parents for a long time.
I'm excited because I don't know what to expect. And I'm not putting any expectations out there. I'm just going to go and be an observer and be compassionate, kind, and listen. And I used to live in Mexico City, and I was privileged. I was married to an attorney, international attorney, with 5 languages, 5 degrees, Harvard grad. And so I always thought that I started my life in Mexico legally, and I'd get offended when people were starting their lives illegally. So this trip is going to teach me a lot. I was married in 1970 to an international attorney from Chihuahua, Mexico. And his father and his mother had purchased a ranch in 1935 from the Mexican government in Chihuahua. And that ranch was the ranch that the Mexican government was going to give to Pancho Villa if he would quit raiding Texas. And the government wanted him to settle down and stop his shenanigans. So they took him out. The government had him in a car and took him out to see the ranch. And he was killed. He was murdered in the car by bandits. So anyway, the land was a parcel of land that was not very good. But my father-in-law was a big rancher in New Mexico, and he wanted a ranch in Mexico. So he bought the land from the Mexican government. About 15, 20 years later, the government wanted the land back, and this wealthy American owned it. So they sent Mexican squatters to the land to start squatting on parcels of the land. And Dad Elkin, to keep peace with the Mexican government, would let these little families have their parcels of land. Well, it was a 5,000 acre ranch, but it ended up being like 500 acres by the time the Mexican government retook it over. Anyway, in this process, my father-in-law was kidnapped and held for ransom. It was 1 million pesos back then, so I don't know what it would be now, but he was returned alive.
Well, I've been wanting to come for the last few years, and I don't even know why. I'm going actually to observe. I really thought the very first time that I thought I was going to go do stuff, like I thought I was going to be able to interact with children. And you know what I'm hoping? This is a good question. This is kind of sad. At home, the church that I belong to, even, there's a lot of parishioners that think that they shouldn't be coming. I mean, they even call them, you're going to go, and this is like almost a bad word to me. They said, you're going to go be with the illegals? I said, what? And I thought, what? Yeah. So I'm hoping to bring home, I don't know what's the word, education, or just say, not, at least to take that word away from them.
We want to solve this problem. We want to solve family separation. I don't want children taken away from parents. And when you prosecute the parents for coming in illegally, which should happen, you have to take the children away.
I do think the American people, I think as a whole, we're good people. These days there's a lot of hate and division going on, but I think as a whole we're good. And I think when we really know the truth, we act out of that truth, and we become then the messengers that we're supposed to be for society.
whatever we want, go shopping, do whatever, and then walk back, and it's no problem.
That's why
Mexicans have to have a visa to do the same thing. They have to go through a whole process and get a visa to do the exact same thing. We're allowed, we're privileged, they're not. So like when people want to say to you, there's no such thing as white privilege. I can walk across the bridge and walk back whenever I want, but they can't. I'm not privileged.
Am I local? No, I'm from the East Coast originally, but I've been here half my life. Simply put, what's good for El Paso is good for Juarez and vice versa. If you look south from the University of Texas, you will see the poverty of Mexico. However, if you look at the skyline downtown El Paso, the banks, you will see the wealth of Mexico. I retired from the El Paso Police Department. So many of the best police officers in the El Paso Police Department were born, raised, educated in Mexico.
So this is gonna blow your mind. I was raised there. I was raised in that neighborhood right there. I grew up, I learned to swim here. Back in the day, I mean, this was a middle-class neighborhood. We're talking 30 years ago. People would drive down, wash their cars. The river actually flowed, it was high constantly. We used to get out of school on Fridays, meet our cousins at the downtown plaza here, and then walk, and then we'd sit at the bridge there where the flags are, and literally watch the people gather up to cross. And we just stand there and entertain ourselves watching people trying to cross, and there was people waiting across the river. There was guys with like makeshift rafts bringing them across. I mean, it was like normal to us.
Such interdependence, one city upon the other, and if you want to take it on a larger level, one country upon the other. This is why the El Pasoans were horrified when they heard about building a wall and this and that, because it sends the wrong message to our neighbors. And I'm speaking for, I'm sure, 90% of El Pasoans when I say that. It sends the wrong message. It sends a message of animosity when we need more cooperation, not less.
I think the biggest myth is that immigrants are dangerous or that immigrants cause crime. We know that that's completely not true. El Paso is a community that's right on the US-Mexico border. We have a very high immigrant population, and yet we are consistently one of the safest cities, if not the safest city of our size in the country.
This is the kind of a town where if someone were legitimately lost and wandered into the territory of gang members, the gang members would help them find their way out. And that is true. We have one of the lowest crime rates in the nation. We're right next door to a very high crime rate city.
One night, we apprehended over 1,000 people here in this section, right from here to the Presidencia Municipal on the Mexican side. You can see it here. During our high months of March and April, that we were averaging about 1,300 to 1,500 apprehensions a day. A lot of them were attributed to this area here, this section that we're standing at. The greater percentage, probably about an 85% of them were Central Americans. The greater percentage of that were people from Guatemala, you know, maybe a couple Brazilians, Cubans, people from maybe other nationalities. This is part of the new fencing that was erected about 2 years ago, and this is the new type of fencing that we're looking to replace in many areas along the south of Port because it's proven very effective. We're still seeing large numbers now in comparison to what this sector was doing last year in the same time, but we're not seeing those 1,500, 1,300. Right now, we're probably averaging about 300 to 500 a day. We've had great support from the government of Mexico. You can see La Guardia Nacional just south of us here. They're helping us. They're set up in certain strategic points as well, where they're trying to influence people not to cross. If they enter to here and they request asylum, if they meet that criteria and they're within that amount of people that we can send, we'll place them in the Migrant Protection Program, and they'll be returned to Mexico to wait out their hearing date. Humanitarian aid, the humanitarian groups that have stepped up, and for us here with this current trend, they've been a great ally because they've supported, they've helped, we've been able to go to them when we've needed placement. When obviously the willingness for them to help because of how they feel is awesome. But the reality also is that criminal organizations exploit that. They exploit that because they tell a lot of the people that are coming that there's going to be aid given to them, and that there's going to be, and on top of that, they're charging these people. They're taking money from them, and then they're bringing them here to cross, to make that, you know, dangerous crossing. So you can see the river is over here on the south side. The North American Canal is on the north side. And this section on the other side, that's a very deep area. That water looks very still, and that's the danger with this American Canal. But a seasoned swimmer would have a hard time. The guys in this office actually invited a reporter who she said she was a Division I swimmer. And they told her, "You want to try it?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'll try it." She had to get help.
Today we had a little explanation from the Border Patrol about what they do and what they encounter. And afterwards they took us to a portion of the El Paso wall. And the part that we saw was one of 3 kinds of wall, and it was double mesh. When I left Kansas to come here, the symbol of the wall meant nothing to me. I kept thinking, why are Americans upset? Why are people fussing about putting up a wall? But when I saw the physical barrier that makes the immigrant different from me, it separates those people from me. It really hurt my heart because I hadn't thought of it as such a huge symbol, but it's a symbol of oppression and power and prejudice. And the people on the other side are like me.
My first time using this.
today was just so hard. I met a lady that's coming from Honduras, and she's been coming since November. She got here yesterday from November, had terrible things happen, and you know, that's in my mind now. Here I am very comfortable. When I got here, I went and sat down, answered emails, I talked to my friends, and that lady has no one here. So I stayed with her a while and helped her a little bit, and just pray that she gets back. I mean, she got to Mexico. I don't remember the town. I've never even heard of that town in Mexico. Supposedly the immigration was going to take her to her other station. They took her wallet, her ID, and her passport, and everything she had. So that's on my mind right now. So it's a whole different world there.
Spanish-speaking people were released into Juarez without anything, without so much as shoelaces, after their shoelaces had been confiscated. And one of the first things people asked for is, please, shoelaces, because when they're released into the streets, that's the first thing that the smugglers are going to hone in on these people, because they don't have shoelaces. People lining up on the bridges, Mexican nationals, and there were about 300, and they were told they'd have to wait an hour, and then they were told they'd have to wait 3 hours, and then they would let just one family through, and then an hour later they would announce that another bridge let a family through. So then all of these people ran to the other bridge. And so it would be interesting to see how is this being portrayed in the media. You know, did this 300 people suddenly morph into 1,500 drug dealers and rapists are trying to clamor to get into our country, when it was actually 300 young people with their families who were just trying to figure out how to get through the system, because right now it doesn't seem to be any logic in the system.
Today, a group of us went to Homeland Security, a building that holds people in detention, and we were able to offer communion to them. It was a mass. I went as the door greeter, and people came in and they were very humble, very orderly, and they were thrilled to come to church service. So it was rewarding to see their faces. It was totally orderly. 3 groups of people, 3 different sections of the men. They wore blue jumpsuits, red jumpsuits, and orange. And they were identified by their situations, by the colors that they wore. My feeling was warmer with the women. There was a mass for the men first, and then the women came separately. And the women were so beautiful. They were calm, they were peaceful. They came in. 3 women near me were very emotional and very upset at the end of Mass. And during the singing, I just went over, stood behind them and stroked their shoulders, just to let them know that someone cared.
It was a gift to be a part of the service with everybody who came, to share with them the gift of hope, to never lose hope in a situation that's very challenging, that they're in, and if they're in it, we are all in and a part of that as well. I, as a person, I'm disappointed that people are incarcerated, you know, in a particular way and have to be singled out and dressed in jumpsuits in different colors. And, you know, I don't know where people's backgrounds have taken them and how they ended up there. But many of the stories I've heard through many of the people who've presented on immigration, have opened my eyes to different views as to why they might be there.
This is my garden. These are radishes. I have it covered because we have cats coming in the yard.
You have to duck your head to go underneath these, because we're short people.
There was a man and his wife. They both had small businesses near us, and we were close to the woman especially. And he was kidnapped for $100,000 in 2010. And I went right away to her store and said, "What are you going to do?" And she said, "I don't know, but I got to get the money right away because if I don't, he'll be killed." So within 2 days, she borrowed money from El Paso, and she got him freed. A year and a half later, he was kidnapped the second time for $100,000. And I went to her and said, "What are you going to do?" And she said, "I don't know. We haven't paid what we borrowed before, but I got to get the money." So it took her a week to get the money. In the meantime, he was tied up in a chair and blindfolded, and he was sitting next to a younger man, and the younger man was like 38. This man was like 60, 38, and he had 3 young children. And he said to our friend, "Look, I'm not going to make it. I'm bleeding. They're beating me up. And I want you to go see my father and tell him I love him. He's the best father in the world. And I know he can't pay the $100,000. So anyway, a friend, after his wife got the money to get him out, they threw him up about 3 blocks from our house. They threw him out in a busy street. And actually, it took a while before people went to him because they were afraid. Because sometimes then, you'd be killed if you went to somebody like that.
Other people that are coming, it's an economic situation. We made Honduras basically a one-crop economy. People live and die by how that crop does. And there's things like crops like corn, which are in Mexico were a staple of the diet. The Mexican farmers, the small farmers, they can't control the price of corn. The United States has huge agriculture that they control the price of corn. So these farmers are at the mercy of that whole other system, which they have nothing to do with. You know, it's costing them more to farm the corn than they're making. So we forced them into these situations, like in Honduras, where they became a one-crop farm, or in Guatemala, where there's huge agriculture coming in and buying up big swaths of land, or just taking. I'm being nice when I say buying up, and they're planting African palm, because African palm is in everything. It's in Nutella, it's in cosmetics, it's in so many products that we use all the time. African palm is a horrible crop. It ruins the soil. It causes erosion. It does all of these environmentally really bad things, besides taking the land away from the indigenous Guatemalan people.
When NAFTA went into effect in January 1st of '94, that obligated Mexico to change its constitution, Article 27, to allow privatization. And also, when the privatization began, there were a whole series of little farm holdings, people jointly farming the land, and some of it private, but they'd be something like 10 or 20 families working together in what are called ejidos. Now, in the United States, they call them land trusts, supporting in its food. But that privatization move eroded that whole system. And then they were migrating to the cities and then migrating north. So about 2 million people over the next 20 years, migrated, or 20 years, migrated north. They calculated, over the years, about 40% of the kids between 12 and 20 were unemployed. And they didn't have educational opportunities because it would cost more than they could afford, the families, to get them into high school and college, We give scholarships to kids or help them a bit with their education, see? But if the kids don't have employment and they aren't getting an education, what are they going to do? And then the narcos come along and they can offer these kids a way, and of course the kids, out of their naivete, accept a deal, and then once they're in, they get blackmailed and trapped.
People need to know that migrants don't leave their home for no reason. They don't leave their home to just, let's go to America, it's a beautiful place. That just doesn't happen. Migrants are not leaving, to go to a beautiful place. They're leaving to go to a place that's safe, a place where they can make enough money to feed their kids. Often it's stories like their 13-year-old daughter, she just turned 13, so the head of the cartel or the gang or the local people that are controlling the drugs, the prostitution, all this stuff, they'll come up and they'll say, hey, I see your daughter is 13 years old, she's looking good, send her over. What do you do as a parent? You can't say no. If you say no, she's dead, you're dead. So what do? You run. That's your only option, is to run. I mean, that's a type of story that you hear frequently. Or that their young son, they want the son to be in the gang, and initially the son refuses, so they kill somebody else to show them that they're, one of the son's friends, or maybe his uncle, or to show them that they're serious and that he has to enter the gang. So again, you can't fight the gang. There's all kinds of corruption. The police are involved in the corruption. You can't go to the police. What do? Your option is run.
We had a lot of violence in Juarez that already in 1993, women began to disappear and be killed in Juarez. So when we moved to Juarez, some of the women in the barrio said, well, they're prostitutes, they work in cantinas. But that wasn't the fact. And little by little, we became aware that most of these women were between the ages of 16 and 22 years old, some of whom were maquila workers, or some who were downtown looking for a job, and they were kidnapped. And people then, little by little, some organizations became created for women, and found out that some were kidnapped for trafficking of organs, or just trafficking women. Some were taken by narco leaders, and some were passionately killed by somebody. Just in July of this year, 19 women have been killed. And this year, since January to now, there have been 76 women killed. The moms of the women disappeared and killed in Juarez. The moms started putting this on the telephone poles in the city. So like if you were gonna walk down Juarez Street today, you'll see they just repainted them. We saw them the other day, they just repainted all the poles. And they put here, no more, no más. So we have their names here, and between 93 and 2018, there's 1,650 women killed in Juarez.
I've worked close to 20 years with this agency, and I've seen a lot of things. Obviously, some things are predictable, some things are unpredictable. So it's a job where you have to be prepared for anything and everything. I mean, I once had a female give birth in the desert to a child. When you're there, you're more worried that everything's going to be okay, that everything's going to come out okay. I've had the unfortunate experience to attempt to rescue someone and them die on me. That's a different side of seeing someone being born. I've had the experience of collecting minors from the desert that have perished, and the animals have eaten at them. There's a lot of misconception, there's a lot of rhetoric, and we don't get involved in that. What we try to do is through the media, through our outreach with the community, with non-governmental organizations, is just basically explain who we are, what we do, and why we're doing what we're doing.
These are names of migrants who die in the desert in the United States. Some few have died in the river, but these are from the people that belong to the No More Deaths in Arizona. They sent me a lot of names. But in the book, Sand and Blood, the author tells us how many thousands have died in the desert. I always pray that I can listen to people. Listen to what they're saying. That's the first thing, to listen and what they need and ask for, and then I try to understand how that can be answered. But that's the first thing I do.
The government is reacting to the fact that we have families arriving at our border seeking asylum. What we should be trying to do is be more proactive and try to figure out why people are fleeing their countries and see if there's anything that we can do to improve that situation so that they don't have to flee in the first place. So I think we need to go back to humanizing immigrants and the immigrant story, and maybe making sure that people understand why these families are coming.
As Americans, we can help people just by opening the door. Think of it in micro terms, in much smaller terms. Think of being in your house, sitting at the dinner table, eating dinner, and there's a knock on the door. And you open the door and there's a terrified woman with a child saying, "Help me." What are you going to do? Are you going to slam that door in their face? Or are you going to say, "Come in"? It's really that easy. That's the decision that we're facing. Okay, now when you put it on a bigger scale, is there the possibility that there's bad actors, drug dealers, cartels, gang members, whatever, coming and pretending that that's the issue? Sure, that's possible. So do you need a vetting process? Sure, absolutely you need a vetting process. But the reality is that that's not what we're doing. Our entire governmental philosophy is one of deterrence. We're just going to make the experience as miserable as we possibly can so that people stop coming. It's not a matter of looking at what is going on, why are people coming. We're not doing anything to address why people are coming. People only leave when they're really, really desperate. Our response to that is just evil, and we have a choice. Like I said, going back to the woman knocking on the door, you have a choice. Open the door and let them in, or slam the door in their face. What we're doing is slamming the door in people's face.
Since I've come, my eyes have been open a little bit more, and I'll continue to stay connected to what is happening in this area. Immigration is not an issue, it's finished. It's not finished, People still want a better life. People are still being, harmed and treated abusively, and there's still so much evil and corruption, and people are trying to find a better life. So how can I say, as a human person, that it's over? It's not over, because we're all responsible for each other. And I don't have an answer to, you know, all of these people have a place. I think they do. I don't know where, if it's just here or, but I think as a human issue, that people want to grow and have a better life. I wouldn't be sitting here if and have what I have if my grandparents didn't do that.
I do believe love is stronger than hate, and so that's what we're about. We will overcome. I do believe if Margaret Mead said only 10% of population can change the world, can change what's going on now. And we don't yet have the 10%. I think we have 10%, but they're not engaged, they're not trusting their knowledge to be able to speak. And so we're hoping to help that, to make a difference.